We have found him, the person with the most courage in the entire face of the earth. Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin, and today I want to talk about what has happened to Alexey Navalny. He is, without question, the greatest hero that exists today in terms of his raw courage, commitment to reforming and improving his beloved homeland, and his unwillingness to leave it permanently, despite the obvious personal risks that are being realized currently for his return. So for those that don't follow this channel or don't know, Alexey Navalny is the Russian opposition figure who had been poisoned with nerve agent, the Russian-made Novichok, restricted to the Russian government, used primarily in political assassinations. We saw that in the United Kingdom with the most famous case of a spy who defected to the West. He was killed. His daughter was also badly wounded. The lingering effects of this nerve agent also made police officers sick. And then in Navalny's case, he was thought to be poisoned in his tea. He went through a series of horrible physical ailments, was unconscious, and then was managed to leave the country at request of his family and brought back to health through German doctors in Germany. He has gone through months of recovery and rehabilitation. It's a miracle that he survived and has become the most famous opposition figure against Putin in the entire history of the world as a consequence of this event. Now, before I go on, it's more than just talking about the fact that he survived and has gone back to Russia, which we'll discuss, but also the things that he is willing to stand up for and the things that he is willing to criticize. There was a thread about the deplatforming of the US president that Alexey published, and I'm going to read this out word for word because I think it's a truly inspiring bit of prose. He says, "I think that the ban of Donald Trump on Twitter is an unacceptable act of censorship. Of course, during his time in office, Trump has been writing and saying very irresponsible things, and paid for it by not getting re-elected for a second term. The election is a straightforward and competitive process. You can participate in it. You can appeal against the results. They're being monitored by millions of people. The ban on Twitter is a decision of people we don't know in accordance with a procedure we don't know. In my opinion, the decision to ban Trump was based on emotions and personal political preferences. Don't tell me he was banned for violating Twitter rules. I get death threats here every day for many years, and Twitter doesn't ban anyone, not that I ask for it. Among the people who have Twitter accounts are cold-blooded murderers, Putin or Maduro, and liars and thieves, Medvedev. For many years, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram have been used as a base of Putin's troll factory and similar groups from other authoritarian countries. Those who denied COVID-19 exist freely and communicate on Twitter. Their words have cost thousands of lives. And yet it was Trump who got banned publicly and ostentatiously. Such selectivity indicates that this was an act of censorship. Of course, Twitter is a private company, but we have seen many examples in Russia and China of such private companies becoming the state's best friends and enablers when it comes to censorship. If you replace Trump with Navalny in today's discussion, you will get an 80% accurate of Kremlin's answer as to why my name cannot be mentioned on Russian TV and I shouldn't be allowed to participate in any elections. This precedent will be exploited by the enemies of freedom of speech around the world, in Russia as well. Every time when they need to silence someone, they will say, "This is just common practice. Even Trump got blocked on Twitter." If Twitter and Jack want to do things right, they need to create some sort of committee to make such decisions. We need to know the names of the members of this committee, understand how it works, how its members vote, and how we can appeal against their decisions. Inspiring thing for me to read. We see that a lot from former Russians living in the West, or Russians who have escaped, who had previously lived under Soviet rule, and saying, the speaking the truth can become a revolutionary act. And that is just an extraordinary thing that Navalny is willing to say and reflect back to the United States and say, look what the Russian government says about me, and how easy it is for you, these tech oligopolies, to do this to other Western liberally minded people. There's nothing intrinsic in our human nature that says we are democratic or says that we have these freedoms of speech. They're built up and fought for over time. It's a bit like human language. There's former monarchs who wondered whether or not each person naturally spoke their own language. And so they would, get people from Greece, and they would get children from France, and they would isolate them. And unsurprisingly, they became deaf mutes. It's not something that happens naturally. These are things that are inculcated through the culture, through mediums, through practice, and through laws. And Navalny standing up for freedom of speech against censorship, despite what he had gone through in his own country, and saying, look, yes, I might have been poisoned by Novichok in the form of an attempted political assassination, but what happens there is not so different to what is happening here. And that was just an extraordinary parallel from a very powerful voice. And even people that would be deeply critical of Trump and very praising of Twitter and all the rest of it, some individuals who I respect who are on the other side of this political debate, even they were willing to share Navalny's words, given the depth of moral authority with which he expressed them, even in the breadth of saying that they disagreed. I, for one, wholeheartedly agree with Navalny's thing, and I hope that those words can be etched in stone, literally speaking, when it comes to pushing back against these waves of censorship. But then Navalny himself, as an individual, this is more than just his views on censorship, Navalny himself was unwilling to abandon Russia despite the entire nation being in service to a very narrow group of people who are willing to go to extraordinary and dangerous lengths to silence opposition. He had already personally suffered a terrible assassination attempt that almost killed him, and took months of painstaking rehabilitation in order to recover. He got on a plane and returned to Russia to draw up an opposition and contest future elections. That is an act of courage, suicidal courage in many ways, but a devotion to patriotism, pride in one's nation, belief in the Russian people and the future of the Russian state that I have not seen from anyone in any context. I mean, even Edward Snowden, who many people hold up as a hero for exposing excesses of the American branches of government, and my feelings on this are decidedly mixed, he ran off to Russia and has remained there ever since. He has never come back to the United States to defend his actions before a court of law, and he's stayed away because he's fearful of the social isolation, the things that the American government can do to him should he ever return. Now, these are well-founded fears, right? We see what happened to Chelsea Manning. We see what happens in Guantanamo. We see the renditions and all of the rest of the terrible sordid history of American dealing with foreign terrorists. These things could happen to Edward Snowden just as easily. Understandable fear, no judgment on that. But then we compare him to Alexey Navalny, who says, yes, all of these things could happen to me and worse. And we see that with the Russian government all the time. However, I am a loyal Russian citizen, even if it's run by a set of crooks and criminals. And I can't abandon those millions of people who support me and believe a better future for my country. I'm going to return and I'm going to face what had happened. There are incredible scenes, which I'm sure we'll have up, of Alexei's wife weeping as he gets on the plane. Just that everyone had this sense of of foreboding about what was happening, even though he had a very large entourage. Anyway, he gets on the plane and he's heading back to Moscow, and then the plane gets diverted because there were thousands of people waiting to celebrate his return, lining out the things at the airport. It gets diverted to another airport, and where he is immediately arrested. Now, he is still okay at the moment, at the time of speaking. I hold grave fears for his future, but at the time of speaking, he had been remanded in custody and was sentenced to 30 days confinement for apparently skipping out on his conditions for previous indictments. Now, this doesn't make any sense to a logical thinking person, because last time he left Russia, he was unconscious, and he was unconscious because he had suffered a deadly nerve agent attack that tried to claim his life. Nevertheless, he has been remanded in custody for 30 days. He still seems to have some access to Twitter, so he's still putting out interesting tweets, and I'm definitely reading them all. But within Russian state television, within the Russian media, within the Russians on the street, they're getting fed a very different narrative of Alexey Navalny, that he abandoned his country, that he wasn't really sick at all, that this is all a Western plot to embarrass them, that he is an incredibly corrupt official who is just, guilty of embezzlement and is trying to overturn the Russian state. This is, very typical, unsurprising things. But I suspect, and I hope, this is just a vain hope, that for Putin's government, it isn't enough just to kill Alexei Navalny. I think they have to discredit him properly first, because he has returned bravely to Russia, and therefore, if he dies, then the consequences internationally for Russia will be exceptionally grave. I think that people will be deeply unforgiving around the world, myself included, as someone who is sympathetic to Russia in many respects. I don't think I could forgive the assassination of such a great hero, such a great man, someone who really could leave Russia to a brighter future, not a Western future. In fact, in some ways, he's better than the West. Those comments that he gave on censorship are things that are pushing back against things that are terrible directions that we're going in. He could be a great thing, not just for Russia, but a great leader for the world in discussing these major issues. And on that note, Angela Merkel, who took Navalny in, made sure he recovered with the Novichok nerve agent attack, publicly criticized Putin for allowing this to happen, which is a big deal for Merkel because she has a good personal relationship with Putin in Russia. She does speak Russian and they do get together on weekends and so forth. It was a big deal for her. Well, she was also critical of Twitter's decision to knock Trump off Twitter permanently because of what it meant for freedom of speech, despite all their personal disagreements that exist directly between Trump and Merkel. She understood higher principles at play, something that Navalny did clearly understood. And it could be a truly interesting thing should somehow Navalny emerge in a position of leadership in a reformed Russia, for us to be turning to Russia and the Russian state for what it truly means to be a liberal society. I'll leave you with that. Please keep an eye on Navalny. Keep him in your thoughts and prayers. He's in the hands of the Russian state. He's gone there willingly, but I dearly hope that he can live free and bring his good message continually to the rest of the world. Leave your comments down below. I'm happy to engage with them, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.